Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brian Stewart, and I am Doug and Rosalie's middle child. I also serve as a pastor in Abbotsford, British Columbia, just outside of Vancouver, so I will be officiating today. Thank you for showing up and being here. Yeah, we really appreciate it. I know a lot of people, some of you traveled a long way, so we really do appreciate. Thank you on behalf of the family. We are doing a live streaming or YouTube of this service, so there will be people watching, so welcome to them. Also, special welcome to my Aunt Margaret, Doug's sister, and also her daughter, Sally, who I believe will be watching at a certain time, so welcome, folks. We are here today to remember and celebrate the life of Douglas Stewart. Doug was born in London, England on August 5th, 1927, and he passed away in his home in Stouffville on October 4th of this year. He was 96 years old. My dad was born in London, England during a very difficult time. He would tell stories. Actually, he didn't tell a lot of stories, but my wife talked to him once, so I found this out. His dad, Frank, really struggled during the Great Depression during the 1930s, where he would say his dad was looking for work really pretty well constantly for those 10 years during the Great Depression. During World War II in London, when it was heavily bombed, my dad would tell stories of how they were either supposed to go down, I don't know if they had a basement of the home, but down as sort of the bomb shelter, or they were really supposed to go to the underground, the Tube in London as a bomb shelter, but sometimes they just stayed in their home in England. Even though my dad was officially too young, he did end up serving in the war for England. He served for the RAF, the Royal Air Force, and towards the end, well, actually from 1945 to 1948, we think. In January 1953, with little money in his pocket, he got on a ship from England and set sail to Canada. The name of the ship was the Carpathia. The journey took 6 days, and he eventually arrived in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He took the train from Halifax to Toronto. He had a promised job there and room and board, and he started working at this company, but he didn't work there that long. And then eventually, soon after that, he started working for a company called Dye & Durham. I know some folks are here today from Dye & Durham, so thank you for being here. My dad began and kind of worked really kind of up the ranks, and by the time he finished, he was co-owner of the company. He was there until 1991, so probably about 37 years at Dye & Durham. He actually arrived in Halifax. We found out some his immigrant landing papers yesterday, really interesting. And he landed in Halifax on January the 17th, 1953. So it was really interesting going through some of that. As I mentioned, he arrived in Toronto in 1952, and shortly after he arrived, he met a young lady named Rosalie Blackburn, whom he would eventually marry. They got married in 1954, I believe on the eve of Hurricane Hazel. They were married on the island, Centre Island or Ward Island, and they were married for 62 years until my mom passed away on December 21st, 2016. In 1956, 2 years after they were married, they had their first child, my sister Debbie, and then 4 years later, I was born, and then 5 years after that, Patrick was born. Both my mom and dad, they love their grandchildren who are all here today. We appreciate that. My wife, Carol, and I, we have 2 children, Mark and Rachel, and my sister, Debbie, her daughter is Emma. So yeah, thanks for being here. Really appreciate that. My dad had a very special place in their heart for the grandchildren, and he was affectionately known as Granddad to the whole family. Since my dad was from England, he had a fondness of the Queen. And so we thought, in honor of my dad, we are going to sing, or you're invited to sing, God Save the Queen. God Save the Queen. It's very interesting. The Queen Elizabeth, was born 1 year before my dad in 1926, and she passed away 1 year before my dad. So they were both 96 years old. So I'm going to invite you to please stand, and you're more than welcome to sing along. You have the song sheet in front of you. God Save the Queen. God save the Queen, and her victorious, happy and holy, not to reign. God save the
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Stewart. I'm Brian's wife. And when I think of my remembrances of my father-in-law, Doug, there are 2 words that really come to my mind. One is admiration, and the other is appreciation. I really admired Doug for his attitude and his ability to carry on, even through tough times. As was mentioned, Doug would have been a 12-year-old kid when World War II broke out. He lived through the Blitz as a 13-year-old in London, England. The bombs fell for 8 months. At one time, they fell for 57 consecutive nights. One time when we were visiting Aunt Margaret in London, England, she could recall a time when they were all huddled under the stairs, the bombs fell, and when they came out from their stairwell closet, all the windows in the house had been blown out. Even though they were difficult times, the city of London was also characterized with a positive spirit. Another time I remember when Doug and Rosalie and my mom, Marion Watson, were sitting around their dining room table chatting, and we started saying, when was the first time we remember going to the movies? Well, for my mother-in-law, who grew up in a small town in Nova Scotia, and for my mother, who lived on a rural farm in Ontario, they didn't go to the movies until they were like into their teens. But Doug piped up and he said, oh no, when I was a kid in London, we would always find some coins and make our way to the Saturday matinee. And he watched lots of Charlie Chaplin and other silent movies. So they found a way to have some fun in their life, even though they were going through hard times. I was also very impressed that he had joined the military and served with the Royal Air Force, stationed mostly in Egypt while they were protecting the Suez Canal. Now, if you knew Doug in his later years, you might think of him as a bit of a homebody. He wasn't always the one out rushing around. So it especially impressed upon me how much I admired him and respected him for getting on a boat all by himself with just a few dollars in his pocket to make a new life for himself in Canada. Brian and I got married in 1986, and I always thought of my father-in-law as a very distinguished British gentleman. And I knew he worked at Dye & Durham, but I didn't know very much about it. And then he retired about 5 years after that. And at his retirement party, I really learned how much love and respect all the people at Dye & Durham had for him. And also there was a lot of humor involved in that party and celebrating the fun things that had happened together in that workplace. I know that just after Doug retired, he suffered sudden hearing loss in one of his ears, and it was a difficult time for him. In 1991, our son Mark was born, and Doug loved coming to Ottawa and helping me with Mark. I think he walked that little baby for miles and miles and miles, even though it was mostly just around the living room. And it was a comfort to both of us and a big help to me. Later, like 5 years later, 5 years ago, he had a bad fall and he injured his back. And that brought on some more painful years that he's been through. And I just want to say a special word of appreciation to my brother-in-law, Patrick, for moving in with him and providing a lot of special care over these last 5 years. Well, those are a lot of the things that I admired about Doug, but I also really appreciated Doug. He sponsored a lot of amazing family vacations. I think my sister-in-law, Debbie, was the brainchild for a lot of these vacations. We went to Myrtle Beach and Hilton Head, and of course, there were the famous Disney cruises. And even though Dad wasn't the big fan of Mickey Mouse that everyone else was, he went right along. In fact, Rosalie loved Mickey Mouse and the whole Disney gang, and it was just wonderful to see how Doug would embrace and support the whole thing. One of the things I also appreciated about Dad is that he was never interfering in our lives, although he found a way to come alongside and support us. So he would let us agonize through the big decisions, like when we left Toronto and moved to Ottawa, and then later to Woodstock, and finally we relocated to the West Coast, just outside Vancouver. He would let us make those choices, but then he would always find a way to come alongside and support us. His generous attitude and financial support really helped our family a lot. He did take a keen interest in his 3 grandchildren. And all 3 of them, he is so pleased to see all 3 of them really make their way in life. And for some reason, he was especially attached to the idea that Rachel had become a nurse. Emma is here all the way from Amsterdam. Mark and his wife, Elizabeth, have come here from Abbotsford. And Rachel, after many delays and rescheduling, has made it here from Vancouver Island. So we just personally want to say how much we appreciate that all of you have made the effort to be here on this special occasion. Thank you for rearranging your schedules and enduring a lot of travel. And at this time, I am going to invite the 3 children to come forward, and each of them have an opportunity to say something if they would like.
Hi, my name's Rachel. I'm one of the grandchildren. Thank you all for being here. Yeah, so when I think of my granddad, I'm just very, very thankful for him. Much of what my mom said, I just remember him being so generous. He had a very quiet but steady and loving presence, and I have so many fond memories of him. A few would be all the trips he took us on. New York, Myrtle Beach, the Disney cruise. I especially loved how we would always go on these trips and out doing activities, but often he would just be in his room, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper, and that was what he wanted to do. But he was just so happy that we'd all be together. And then also a great memory is him just every morning driving to Tim Hortons, drinking his coffee and then driving back. And I think those were just some fond memories of time spent with him. Hi, I'm Emma. It's nice to see so many people here. Yeah, I think going back to what Uncle Brian was saying earlier, he really loved to share his stories with us growing up in London during the war. And then especially since I recently moved to Amsterdam, about his cross Europe biking tour that he did post-war, going from France to Belgium, through the Netherlands, sometimes getting his stories a little bit mixed up about how far he actually went. But he did make it to Canada eventually, which is what mattered, because that's where he met our grandma. And they got to share quite a long time together, which was really lovely. Growing up, I really remember going to Dye & Durham with him. He would take me there, and it was like a shopping spree where I got to pick out all of the fun colored papers and markers and pencils, which for somebody who really liked to draw was a dream. Yeah, and also he would often pick me up from school, and everyone knows that he loved Tim Hortons, as we see a little dedication to that. I think he single-handedly kept the Tim Hortons alive near his house and funded their renovations. But he did make an exception for me and would take me to Second Cup to get my favorite treat. And as I grew older and didn't need someone to pick me up from school anymore, the owners and workers of the Second Cup would still come out, and when I would pass in the street, ask me about him and ask me how he was doing, because he always made a point to get to know people and get to know the people that he was interacting with every day, which was a big part of his charm. Yeah, and I think most recently, after moving to Amsterdam, we really tried to keep up with our weekly calls over FaceTime. He would always ask me about what movies I'd seen recently, even though neither of us had stepped foot in a movie theater in years. But every time without fail, every week, he would ask about it. And then we would spend a while gossiping about my mom and sharing stories about whatever funny things she had been getting up to that week. So I think I am going to really miss those moments that I got to spend with him, but I think, or I hope that he is in a better place now and reunited with our grandma, because I know he missed her very deeply. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Stewart. I'm also one of the grandchildren, and I just have a poem I want to share. It's called When Great Trees Falls. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees falls in forests, small things coil into silence. Their senses erode beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly, our eyes briefly see what a hurtful clarity. Our memories suddenly sharpened, examines gnaws on kind words unsaid, promises walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, take leave of us. Our souls dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened, our minds formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they exist, they existed. We can be and be better, for they existed.
Thank you, Rachel, and Mark, we appreciate that. We're going to sing Amazing Grace. Again, you have the lyrics in front of you. And yeah, maybe we can stand, stretch a little bit, and we'll stand as we sing Amazing Grace. Thank you. You may be seated. When I heard about a week ago that my dad had died, I was very shocked, and I knew he was 96 years old, but still, I was very sad. Had a lot of memories. In fact, even I was in here, the washroom today, tying my tie. The memory just came back. It was my dad that taught me how to tie my tie. Yeah, I have a lot of memories of my dad. I remember when I was younger and we lived on Craigmore Crescent, that I think it was like a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. Just, I guess he was just trying to relax me. We were just kind of resting. And he would lie down next to me on the couch, and he would just kind of caress my hair, and he would make the sound of the ocean, just that soothing sound. And it was a very special memory, just kind of the two of us together. When I was in my teen years, I mean, I was in my early teens, so I remember this, that my dad and I were walking down in some town in Ontario, and I was holding my dad's hand. And I remember thinking, you know, as a teenager, this is a little weird for me to be holding my dad's hand, but I thought, I don't really care. It was kind of a special memory of him. I didn't do well at school in the early years, and they thought maybe I had some sort of learning disability. So there was a time when my mom and my dad, they took me to this doctor, I'm not sure what her title was, just to evaluate me. And I was in the room when the evaluation came back. And basically what I remember, the doctor said, Brian will be lucky if he makes it through high school. He definitely won't be going to university. And my dad afterwards is saying to me, you know, you don't listen to them, Brian. You don't listen to them. You're my son, and you can do whatever you want to do. It was kind of a really special moment. My dad often didn't say a lot of things, but you know, he was very encouraging at times. My dad would get mad at us, of course. There'd be times when my brother Patrick and I, we'd be downstairs in our basement in Craigmore, and I would tell Patrick to put on a football helmet I gave him some boxing gloves, and I put the hockey gloves on, and I just started pounding him, right? I just started beating on him. And my dad would be upstairs, and all of a sudden we would hear, Brian, knock it off, right? We'd keep going at it again, and a few minutes later, Brian, knock it off. No, it was Brian, it wasn't Patrick, right? And then we kept going, and then we heard the steps coming downstairs, and Patrick would hide in the cupboard, and my dad would just kind of let me happen. Yeah. Yeah, there was all these different types of memories that I had. My dad had a really good sense of humor. I mean, there was a serious side to my dad, but he had a really good sense of humor. Like, he loved some of the old British comedies, like On the Buses, upstairs, downstairs. And he really liked some goofy shows. Remember the show Get Smart? Yeah, my dad loved that show, and it was so silly. And we would there was a line in Get Smart where they said, they didn't say that, but they said, sorry about that, Chief. And he would say it, and he would just kind of laugh. It was kind of the silliest show, but I would remember coming home sometimes on Fridays, and he would be watching those Canon and Mannix and the Rockford Files. And I just really enjoyed those times of watching TV with my dad. He loved, as someone mentioned, he loved the movies. And I think his probably favorite movie was 2001, A Space Odyssey. And he said, Brian, that is the greatest movie ever made. And we saw that, a few times. And they'd also say, editing, Brian, editing. A good editor can make a bad movie good and a good movie great. That was kind of one of his lines. So he loved TV. He loved watching shows, Kojak, all these type of things. Yeah, I remember my dad was a very clever man. He didn't have a lot of formal education, but he was very clever, very intelligent. In fact, even I would say till, last couple months or even more recently, he was probably more up to date on current events than I was. He was just a very smart, bright, intelligent person. I am a pastor, and there was a time when I was candidating to go to another church, and the vote from the congregation was 86%, which I didn't think was very good. And I told my dad that, and I remember him saying, Brian, politicians would die to have an 86% approval. So there was, every so often in my life, my dad would just, he just said the right thing. Yeah. So I have a lot of fond memories, and, I've shed, some tears this week. He was a good dad. Dad, you were a good dad. And I love you. We love you. And, we will miss you. We come to funerals, and, sometimes we feel uncomfortable in funerals because, it's the subject of death, right? So I understand that. There's a verse that Jesus said, and he said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So we are mourning, and we trust in that we are comforted. My mom passed away 7 years ago. And actually, I know her funeral was here, but it was in the same room, I believe. My mom was a very committed Christian. And by that, I mean that a time in her life, she had asked Jesus to forgive her, and she put her trust and faith in Jesus as a savior. And I have a lot of confidence that my mom is in heaven, enjoying the presence of God. My dad didn't go to church very often. Sometimes he would come and when I was preaching. But my mom tells a story that in the fall of 1955, Billy Graham was in town in Toronto. In fact, it was Billy Graham. Some of you may remember that name, an evangelist. And it was his first crusade, first mission in Canada. It was held at Maple Leaf Gardens from almost a month, September to October 1955. And I was reading actually this week that 375,000 people attended that mission, and 7,000 people went forward to accept Christ. And my mom tells me my dad was one of those that came forward to put his faith, trust in Christ. So I had a chance over the years to talk to my dad many times about God, and my trust, my hope, and my prayer is that he is in the presence of Jesus right now, and that he has been reunited with my mom. I had this image last week at church. We were singing a song, and there was this image that my dad was just ecstatic, like just so happy, like a kid. Yeah. And that him and my mom were dancing around together, just having so much fun. I don't know if it was true, but it was a very strong image that I had. So I'll miss you, Dad. I thank my dad. He was a good dad. He was a good dad. And I loved him and love him very much. Our closing hymn is It Is Well With My Soul. Again, you have the lyrics in front of you, and we will stand to sing that. It is well with my soul. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Yes. We again want to express our appreciation for you coming. I see some of you folks I do not know, and some I recognize. So thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to join us. Right after I pronounce the benediction, there are some refreshments downstairs, and we invite you to join us. So you can just head out, go downstairs, and it'd be nice if you could spend a little bit of time with us. So the committal, into God's keeping we commit Douglas Stewart, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. And the benediction, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. Amen. Thanks for coming. We look forward to seeing you downstairs for refreshments. Thank you.
I work here. So this is where the service was, the building's supposed to be. Do you have a church involved or?
Yeah.
No, or do you have a minister or anyone you know? Or, no, but we can contact somebody. If you give me an idea, what type of faith you have. Okay, so would you like to have the priest come here or do you think you'd rather go to a Catholic church? Yeah, okay, I don't know, you don't have to decide about that. But anyway, we just. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes we do St. Mary's and everything, St. Luke's, and we go there sometime, but sometime the priest comes here.